Have you ever looked at a 1400-year-old text and suddenly realized, wait a second, this reads exactly like an architectural blueprint? Well, let's dive right into this explainer and unpack the totally fascinating framework of Surah 3, also known as Aal-e-Imran. If you look at this text not just as some collection of disjointed verses, but as a deeply structured, interconnected blueprint, a profoundly clear picture emerges. It is a stunningly precise map of human psychology, societal resilience, and ultimate accountability. Today, we're going to reconstruct exactly how this 200-verse text builds its case from the absolute ground up. And why does this matter to you today? Because whether you approach this as a believer, a philosopher, or honestly just a curious student of history, this framework offers a brilliant, timeless blueprint for human resilience in the face of absolute chaos.
So, to really wrap our heads around this text, we actually need to start with a surprisingly simple question. How does a 1400-year-old text interpret itself? Often when people approach ancient literature, they immediately pile on centuries of outside historical commentaries, cultural baggage, and external traditions. But what if we just dropped all of that? There is something incredibly liberating and honestly quite unusual about letting a text do the talking. We're going to ask a purely structural question here. How does the text itself act as its own internal glossary? Like, how does it actually define its own terms?
Now, the absolute key to unlocking this whole blueprint is a concept called tasrif. This establishes the vital analytical lens we'll be using to decode this entire structure today. Tasrif is basically the methodology of contextual self-referencing. In practice, it means we track repeated root words, vocabulary, and structural patterns throughout the verses, allowing the text to define its own terms. It's a phenomenally empowering methodology for the reader, honestly, because it prevents us from imposing our own modern biases or external assumptions onto the architecture. By using tasrif, we aren't just guessing what a word means, we are actively observing how the text itself builds the definition.
Okay, here's our roadmap for the explainer today. We'll be covering 1. Decoding the Quranic compass, 2. Clear foundations and allegories, 3. The common word, 4. The crucible of hardship, 5. Unity, division, and taqwa, and finally, 6. The people of understanding.
All right, Section 1. Decoding the Quranic compass. Let's see how this text lays down the bedrock of its self-proclaimed purpose.
Right out of the gate, the source material establishes its authority and its orientation. First, it draws a definitive line in the sand by positioning itself as al-Furqan, which translates to the criterion. It's this unifying standard meant for distinguishing truth from falsehood. But then, quite surprisingly, it extends an olive branch to the past. It uses the word musaddiq, meaning it is a confirmation of previous revelations. It doesn't arrive on the scene seeking to erase or just completely replace what came before it. Instead, the text positions itself as part of a continuous, ongoing stream of guidance that has always existed for humanity. It isn't some brand new religion dropping out of the sky. It's the restoration of an ancient, ongoing conversation.
Moving right along to Section 2, Clear Foundations and Allegories. Building up from that foundational compass, the text introduces a super crucial distinction in how its verses are actually constructed and interpreted. Think of the muhtamat as the unshakable structural pillars holding up the roof of this architectural blueprint. I mean, the text literally calls these clear foundational verses the mother of the book. They provide direct, completely unambiguous guidance. On the flip side, you have the mutashabihat. These are the multifaceted or allegorical verses. They are inherently more complex, and the text provides this remarkably self-aware warning right here at the very beginning. If you unmoor yourself from the solid pillars, those with deviating hearts are going to spin those allegories into a tornado of division or fitna. The instruction is crystal clear. Stay grounded in the clear structural foundations and absolutely do not let bad faith actors weaponize the allegorical, nuanced poetry to create chaos.
Which brings us to Section 3, the common word. Now, let's look at how this framework handles different human orientations and historical figures within that continuous stream of guidance.
You'll notice throughout this blueprint, the text constantly contrasts two very different human mindsets, the conscious orientation versus the concealing orientation. Are you actively keeping your heart open to guidance and deeply reflecting on creation, or are you turning away, totally absorbed in the immediate, fleeting gratification of this material world? To illustrate this, the text brings up the extraordinary historical lineage of the family of Imran, which includes highly revered figures like Maryam, or Mary, and Isa, Jesus.
But it gives us this detail for a highly specific reason. It levels the playing field. It explains that these figures aren't praised just for their DNA, their titles, or their family tree, but for their purely conscious orientation and sincere intent. It really brings the text to life by proving that your spiritual worth is determined by your present actions, not your historical pedigree.
And that leads to a totally massive call to action. The text invites everyone, specifically addressing the people of the book, to a common word. It's this huge universal invitation to Tawheed, which is a singular orientation toward one overarching reality. But why does this matter to us today, especially if you're tuning into this explainer from a secular perspective? Because fundamentally, this is an incredibly powerful anti-authoritarian stance. It demands that we associate nothing with that ultimate reality, making sure no human being, no matter how pious, wealthy, or powerful they are, can elevate themselves as a lord over you. That liberation, that absolute equality under one reality, is the common ground intended to unify all genuine guidance across history.
Now for Section 4, the crucible of hardship. Let's dive right into the kind of storm this architectural structure is built to survive, specifically the psychological breakdown of human hardship.
So a big chunk of this text deals with a massive external setback, usually contextualized as the historic Battle of Uhud. But here's the wild part. It doesn't read like a dry military history book at all. It actually reads like a deeply insightful psychological breakdown. The text frames hardship not as some arbitrary, angry divine punishment, but as a diagnostic tool. It's a revealing crucible. When a catastrophic event happens, a devastating loss, a defeat, a trauma, an internal wavering begins, that intense pressure simply clarifies and exposes what is truly inside a person's heart. Think about how incredibly modern that sounds, right? Hardship is literally positioned as the ultimate diagnostic test of our psychological state. Because when a crisis hits and things just completely fall apart, you get two very visceral, totally contrasting responses. On one hand, you have people who find security. These are folks who trust the process, who trust the broader reality, way beyond their own immediate control. And this trust actually leads to a state of restful security and calm, even in the bitter face of defeat. On the other hand, you have those who become entirely consumed by the self. Instead of trusting reality, they project their own fears, anxieties, and ignorance right onto reality, because they are driven purely by self-concern, ego, and worldly desires. So the question becomes, when things fall apart, do you trust the broader reality, or do you become completely consumed by your own self-preservation?
All right, Section 5, Unity, Division, and Taqwa. Let's move up to the ultimate goal of the text, which basically acts as the protective roof over this whole conceptual house. After laying out the structural foundations and showing us how to weather those psychological storms, the text drops its ultimate uncompromising demand. And hold fast altogether to the rope of Allah and do not be divided. The warning against division here is incredibly stark. In the context of our architectural blueprint, this rope is the clear foundational guidance itself. It is an explicit, overarching command not to splinter off into differing, competing sectarian human institutions after the clear proofs have already come to you. And to keep that unbreakable unity intact, the text constantly calls for a state known as taqwa. Now, forget everything you've ever heard about this just meaning the fear of God. If we use our tasrif method and look at the root Arabic letters WQY, a huge paradigm shift happens. It actually means to protect, shield, or guard. It's not about cowering in fear at all. It's a protective awareness. It is a constant, vigilant consciousness of reality that actively shields a person from their own self-destruction. This protective consciousness is literally the central nervous system, the core protective mechanism of the entire text.
Finally, Section 6, the people of understanding. So the absolute crucial question is, what kind of human being is this entire blueprint actually trying to build? Who is the ideal inhabitant of this architecture?
This explainer wraps up by describing a group called the Ulu al-Albab, which roughly translates to the people of core understanding. These are the folks who use their protective consciousness, their taqwa, to maintain constant mindfulness. And we're not talking about isolated monks living in remote caves. They are maintaining this constant mindfulness right in the middle of their everyday lives, standing, sitting, resting. And what do they do with that everyday mindfulness? They reflect deeply on the natural order, on the intricate, mind-blowing creation of the heavens and the earth. And that deep, unyielding reflection leads them to this incredibly awe-inspiring conclusion. Our Lord, you did not create this without purpose. It's basically the ultimate rejection of nihilism. They recognize that existence is not just some chaotic, random accident. Creation has a deliberate, accountable purpose. This profound realization is exactly what drives their unwavering commitment to conscious living. They don't view the temporary nature of life as some meaningless delusion to get lost in, but as a deliberate, purposeful reality that absolutely requires ultimate individual accountability.
So, when you finally step back and look at this whole structure, it really leaves us with a provocative thought. Based on its own internal definitions, its own structural pillars, and its deep psychological insight, is this 1400-year-old blueprint asking us to build yet another dividing wall of tribal, sectarian identity? Or is it actually inviting humanity into a unified architecture of human consciousness, a holistic way of living in true alignment with reality itself? It is an absolutely amazing framework to reflect on, and it for sure leaves you wanting to explore the rest of the structure.